Britain, where lawmakers have voted to seize control of the Brexit process to try to find a majority for an alternative way forward that would break the parliamentary deadlock. Lawmakers voted by 329 to 302 to take control of Britain's EU divorce matters from Prime Minister Theresa May. 30 Tory MPs voted against the government, while 3 ministers resigned to join the 29-strong Tory revolt on Brexit against May. For more on that, now we're joined by our correspondent, Ollie Barrett, who is joining us live now from the British capital. Ollie, good morning. Theresa May, Ollie, is no longer in charge of Brexit while still being Prime Minister. This is kind of confusing. How does all this work?
Well, no one really knows, least of all Theresa May. These really are unprecedented times in parliamentary business here in the UK, and it's unclear exactly how the following days will play out. But from Wednesday, MPs are going to get time to debate in the House of Commons and vote on a series of alternatives to the Brexit plan that Theresa May has put forward. And the idea is that if any of those alternative Brexit plans can reach a majority in the House of Commons, then MPs will hope that Theresa May, the British Prime Minister, would follow through on that, would take that plan to Brussels and negotiate on that basis and try and get it signed off by the European Union member states. Theresa May has been pretty clear up to this point that she will not feel bound by whatever the House of Commons decides. She's described this move as unwelcome. The government's called it dangerous. It's certainly constitutionally very controversial indeed for MPs to try and take control away from the government in this way, but Parliament is sovereign in the UK according to the democratic system here, and the Speaker of the House of Commons, John Bercow, appears to be allowing this process to play out. But as I say, no one really knows how this works over the coming days because no one in the House of Commons has seen it before.
And then, Ollie, we've had these 3 cabinet ministers resigning, as you well know. Will Theresa May face another no-confidence motion in the days to come? I mean, she has survived this before, hasn't she?
It's very possible indeed. We know that the opposition Labour Party will bring a no-confidence vote as soon as they feel like they're getting close to having the numbers to be able to unseat the government. As you say, she won last time around, and it's entirely possible that were there to be another no confidence vote in Theresa May's government, that even some Conservative MPs who are desperately fed up of the Prime Minister would actually vote on her side rather than see the prospect rise of an opposition Labour Party moving into government, of Jeremy Corbyn, the opposition Labour leader, walking at some point in the not too distant future over the steps of Downing Street as Prime Minister. So it's not necessarily a given that even though Theresa May is in such a desperate position now with regards to control of her own party and control of the Brexit process and control of the government more widely, it doesn't necessarily mean that she would lose a no confidence vote. But there is certainly increasing chatter here in London about the prospect now of a general election being one of the only ways that perhaps this impasse can be broken. But even that doesn't necessarily solve everything. You could have a similarly split parliament returned at a general election. So at the moment, very difficult to see exactly what the way out of this crisis is actually going to be.
And then finally, Ollie, just for clarification's sake for us and even for myself, with this deadline of the 29th of March, just 3 days away, that original deadline at least, what is the likely fate of Brexit at this point?
Well, that deadline has gone now, thanks to the European Union agreeing to a delay. So we know that Britain is not leaving on March the 29th. We know that Brexit can be delayed until the middle of May if Theresa May gets her Brexit deal through the House of Commons this week. That this remains unlikely, but you never know. The ERG group of her own Conservative Party, the DUP party, which props her up at Westminster, they may be looking at this constitutional crisis playing out, these MPs taking control of the Brexit process and thinking, if we don't vote for Theresa May's deal, we may never see any Brexit at all. So in a funny old way, this crisis may play into Theresa May's hands in terms of swinging the numbers in her direction when it comes to her Brexit deal, and we may see a vote on her Brexit deal, a so-called third meaningful vote, as soon as Thursday.
Very well, Ollie, we'll leave it there at that. But of course, as always, we appreciate your reporting for us. That was Ollie Barrett speaking to us from the British Hall. Now moving on with the news, at least 19 people have been killed and 100 others have been injured in flash floods in Iran's southern province of Fars. Torrents of muddy water flooded the city of Shiraz, which witnessed the highest death toll. Heavy rains have affected more than 56,000 people living in 270 villages and small towns in the northern provinces. The widespread floods have blocked roads and triggered landslides amid warnings of more heavy rains expected during the week. The flash flood struck at a time when many government offices were closed due to the Iranian New Year holidays. President Hassan Rouhani, while expressing condolences to victims' families, has demanded an immediate investigation into the emergency. Well, Israeli warplanes have continued striking targets across the Gaza Strip despite a ceasefire brokered by Egypt. The Israeli ministry said it targeted military sites of Hamas and the Islamic Jihad group with 15 airstrikes. It said that Israeli warplanes also hit the offices of Hamas's supreme leader Ismail Haniyeh after alleged rocket attacks. Gaza's health ministry said that 7 Palestinian civilians were wounded in the fresh bombings. Denying the rocket attacks, the Hamas-run Gaza Interior Ministry said that it has launched an investigation to determine who fired the rockets at Israel. Earlier, Hamas announced that a ceasefire has been brokered by Egyptian mediators. However, Haniyeh issued a statement warning Israel against heavy retaliation. He said that the Palestinian people will not surrender and its militant factions will deter the enemy if it exceeds the red lines. In Beirut, a senior Hamas delegation discussed the Gaza situation and Israeli aggression with Lebanese group Hezbollah leader Hassan Nasrallah. Earlier, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, during a meeting with President Donald Trump at the White House, said that Israel will not tolerate these attacks. Well, the UN has said that the status of the Golan Heights has not changed, and its policy on the Israeli-occupied Syrian territory is reflected in the relevant resolutions of the Security Council. The UN Secretary General's spokesman, Stefan Dujarric, at a briefing at the UN headquarters said unilateral declarations are not binding on UN resolutions. U.S. President Donald Trump's recognition of the Golan Heights as Israeli territory has generated global condemnation. While declaring Israel's laws, jurisdiction, and administration in the occupied Syrian Golan Heights as null and void, the UN has demanded Israel to rescind its decision. The Arab League condemned the move, saying that Trump's recognition does not change the area's status. Meanwhile, the European Union reiterated their stance against recognizing Israeli sovereignty over territories, including the... Thank you for staying with us, viewers. Well, Germany's Angela Merkel and the EU Commissioner Jean-Claude Juncker are traveling to Paris today and will be meeting with President Xi Jinping together with Emmanuel Macron. Now, for more on what is expected from this engagement, we're now joined by our correspondent in Hong Kong, Patrick Falk. Patrick, thanks for joining us here at Indus for your reporting. Now, given what's been said about the need for Europe to be cautious with China, Patrick, what can President Xi hope to achieve during this meeting?
Well, this visit by Xi Jinping comes ahead of the China-EU summit next month. So both sides are going to be looking to lay the foundations for those talks taking place in Brussels. As you say, there has been a lot of criticism directed towards China by the Europeans in recent weeks. So perhaps that dinner on the French Riviera on Sunday night between Emmanuel Macron and Xi Jinping was designed to soften the atmosphere. Now, France, interestingly, perhaps is playing the trickiest balancing act. On one hand, it wants to push back against Beijing, seeing it perhaps as an economic rival. But on the other hand, it certainly wants to woo Chinese investments. And indeed, we've seen billions of dollars worth of deals signed during President Xi's visits, notably that purchase of 300 Airbus jets worth $30 billion. So what Xi Jinping really needs to do in this meeting meeting is to demonstrate to the European leaders that it is a fair play and that all sides can cooperate on a level playing field. And if he can do that, then he really will have achieved a lot during this trip. Interestingly, also, France is one of the US allies that hasn't banned Huawei's 5G networks, and if President Xi can make any inroads on that front, that would be a big achievement.
So how then, Patrick, has China responded to all this criticism? You alluded to a bit of that, but just expand on that if you can, please.
Well, there's a very interesting article in the Global Times today, an op-ed piece, which really echoes the feeling of European leaders like Angela Merkel and Emmanuel Macron, essentially saying that Europe needs to be more united and it needs to be more assertive, but not more assertive against China, more assertive against the US. It's saying that Western ideology or US ideology is often mistaken as being Western ideology, and in fact the European thinking is very different, and it says that Washington is often marginalizing the Europeans in many ways, and it makes a very valid point. It points out that you know, this gas pipeline, for instance, that Germany and Russia is building, the Chinese haven't intervened on that matter. It also hasn't interfered with European companies' desire to trade with Iran. Also, interestingly, it's noted that European companies actually sell a lot more cars than the Americans do in China, and yet China's reduced tariffs on European automakers. So some valid points being made there, and again, this is something that President Xi needs to demonstrate to European leaders.
And then, you know, Patrick, there is then this talk, obviously, of the United States itself and that trade war which continues between the U.S. and China. We have now U.S. officials, including Stephen Mnuchin, traveling to Beijing on Thursday for further trade talks. Is there any indication that the two sides are any closer to finalizing a deal?
Well, hard to say. These are described as being crucial talks, but every round of discussions between the two sides are really described as being crucial. The Chinese have made some big steps in addressing American concerns, and they've passed foreign investment laws, importantly, to show the Americans that it is taking it seriously. And notably, also, a Beijing court has just ordered that a Chinese auto company, Jiangling Motors, ordered it to stop making and selling what was essentially a Range Rover copycat SUV. So, like I say, it does want to be seen to be addressing those IP concerns in particular. It will be harder, perhaps, to address this issue of enforcement, which no doubt is going to be key to these discussions taking place on Thursday. One thing that we are hearing being talked about is the possibility that if China were to step outside the rules that the two sides discussed, that perhaps the US will raise tariffs on the Chinese, and the Chinese won't be able to retaliate. That is one mechanism that we're hearing about, but we'll just have to wait and see whether or not that is something that the Chinese are willing to go with.
Very well, Patrick. We'll leave it there at that. Of course, we appreciate your reporting for us. That was Patrick Fox speaking to us from Hong Kong, our correspondent. Let's move on with the news now. Pakistan's Prime Minister Imran Khan has said that he has cancelled his scheduled meeting with the Taliban in Islamabad due to concerns expressed by the Afghan government. Prime Minister Imran Khan has suggested an interim setup in Afghanistan as a possible solution to the apparent deadlock in the ongoing peace process. In Afghanistan itself, the United Nations has said that 13 civilians have been killed in a U.S. airstrike in northern Kunduz province. In a statement, the UN Assistance Mission in Afghanistan said that the victims included 10 children. It said that 3 other civilians were injured in the airstrike. Earlier, the Taliban claimed that it has killed 25 Afghan security personnel in an attack on a police station in southern Helmand province. Spokesman Zabihullah Mujahid in a statement said that 8 other policemen were wounded. In another development, at least 8 civilians were hurt in an explosion at a health clinic in eastern Jalalabad city. A government spokesman said that 3 children and 3 women were among those wounded in the blast. No group has yet claimed responsibility for the attack. US-backed Kurdish rebels have called for the establishment of an international court in Syria to try suspected ISIS militants. Syrian Democratic Forces, in a statement, urged the international community to set up a special tribunal in northeast Syria to prosecute ISIS militants. They say that the establishment of a special tribunal can guarantee free or fair trials, in accordance with international law and human rights covenants. The announcement came 2 days after the Syrian Democratic Forces claimed victory against ISIS militants. States has told Russia that Washington and its allies will not stand on the sidelines as Moscow exacerbates tensions in Venezuela. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo told his Russian counterpart on Monday that America and its allies will not stand on the sidelines as Moscow exacerbates tensions in Venezuela. On a telephone call with Russia's Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov, the U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo urged Russia to cease its unconstructive behavior in Venezuela. State Department spokesman Robert Palladino said that the continued insertion of the Russian military to support President Nicolas Maduro is worsening the crisis in Venezuela. New Zealand's Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern, meanwhile, has announced that a royal commission will probe the March 15th terrorist attacks on 2 Christchurch mosques. She said that the commission would leave no stone unturned. Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern announced the formation of a royal commission after New Zealand's security agencies were criticized for failing to prevent the attacks. A royal commission is New Zealand's most empowered form of judicial inquiry.
I do want to say that royal commissions are usually reserved for matters of the gravest public importance, and it is clearly the appropriate form of inquiry for this instance.
Prime Minister Ardern said that the commission would vet investigations by New Zealand's security agencies to ensure that they focused on the right issues. She said that the commission would also check if any clues were missed by the agencies.
While New Zealanders and Muslim communities around the world are both grieving and showing compassion for one another, they are also quite rightly asking questions on how this terror attack was able to happen here.
Prime Minister Ardern said that the commission would inquire about the ease with which the attacker obtained weapons. She said that the inquiry would also look into the role of social media in the terrorist attacks.
This includes questions around the accessibility of semi-automatic weapons, the role social media has played generally.
New Zealand's Muslim community has welcomed the announcement of the Royal Commission. In related news, an Australian teenager who became famous for smashing an egg on the head of an Islamophobic senator has appeared on television. Will Connolly became known worldwide as Egg Boy after he embarrassed Senator Fraser Anning for blaming the Christchurch terrorist attacks on Muslim migration. In an interview, Connolly explained his motivations.
The senator released a statement which was pretty much a divisive hate speech, blaming the victims for the attack, and I was just flat out disgusted.
Australian teenager Connolly said that his egg attack on Senator Anning had achieved positive results.
This egg has united people, and money has been raised, tens of thousands of dollars has been raised for those victims.
Egg Boy Connolly said he was overwhelmed by the public support that he has received from around the world. Well, police in California say that they have found a note referring to the Christchurch terrorist attacks after an arson attack on a mosque. Police said that they are investigating the fire at the Islamic Center of Escondido as a probable hate crime. They said that the note was found in the parking lot of the mosque located about 50 kilometers north of San Diego. The fire caused minor damage to the building's exterior. No one was hurt in the incident. Over to Central Africa now, where at least 1,000 Ebola cases have been detected in Congo in the second largest outbreak that started last year in August. Congo's health ministry in a tweet said that the death toll from the disease has reached 629. The latest outbreak was first recorded in Congo's North Kivu province. It later spread to neighboring Ituri province. Officials said that the efforts to contain the latest epidemic outbreak have been hampered by poor security. A library under a Jakarta flyover has become a popular respite for street children and local communities alike. The library has survived pollution and threats from gangsters since it was opened 3 years ago.
Unlike most libraries around the world, silence is not required at this open-air library in Indonesia. In fact, it would be impossible to enforce silence at the reading park. It is wedged between 2 lanes of traffic on the outskirts of Jakarta, a city notorious for having some of the world's worst traffic jams. Despite its suffocating location and opposition from criminal gangs, the library has thrived.
We want to make the image of this under the bridge area to be more positive to the people, because before this place was perceived very negatively. There was a lot of rubbish, gangsters were here and caused anxiety to the locals living in the area. Then we came and provided free books, and we also wanted to bring books closer to the community.
Initially, the library did not go down well with the locals, but organizers gradually persuaded the community to support the project.
Initially, many people didn't support us. When we came here, we asked for forgiveness first from those who were here, such as hawkers. We approached them. We didn't expel them, but we approached them, especially the gangsters who were here, and then the Angkot drivers.
Free reading gardens known as Taman Bakan have existed in various forms across Indonesia for decades, but the social benefits of roadside libraries are often outweighed by the health risks posed to their users by traffic fumes.
Sports news now. Roger Federer has advanced to the 4th round of the Miami Open after beating Serbia's Filip Krajinovic. Federer raced to a 4-1 lead behind an early break in the second and finished with 35 winners to 23 unforced errors. The Swiss star won in straight sets by 7-5, 6-3. And France has won its Euro 2020 qualifying fixture against Iceland by 4-0. Playing at Stade de France Stadium, reigning world champions France defeated Iceland by 4-0. Star forward Kylian Mbappe scored 1 goal and set up 2 more to move France up to the top position of Group H in the Euro 2020 qualifying round. France will next face Turkey in its 3rd match of the qualifying round.